Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cover One Roundup podcast here on the Cover One YouTube channel and subsequently wherever you watch your podcasts. I am your co-host, Kyle Silagyi, joined this and every week by Cover One features writer Rob Quinn. Rob, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Awesome game Saturday, so looking forward to talking about that. Last week I was dealing with a sinus infection, so that's over. So ready to bring the heat tonight.
I think I was sick 2 weeks ago, so I gave it to you through the podcast. I apologize about that. But hey, we're good now. We're ready to go. So today, as Rob alluded to, we are going to be reviewing the Bills' dominant preseason win over the Chicago Bears. We're also going to be looking at the players who have impressed us thus far this preseason, the standouts from the first two games of the preseason. And we're also going to look at the players who need a strong finish to this preseason, a strong game against the Packers at home, if they want to crack the 53-man roster. And then we're going to finish off, as always, with some hot takes. But before we get into any of that, Cover One is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Rob, can you tell us a little bit about Underdog Fantasy?
Yeah, so Underdog Fantasy is an awesome fantasy sports app. I'm in an ungodly amount of their best ball leagues now. They're just addicting. It's really cool to play with the app. I actually did some of the parlays this past weekend, made like $40. So it's pretty cool. You could do pick'ems, parlays, player props, and best ball leagues, which I haven't done until this year. And it's awesome. And if you use the code COVER1, you will get a free $25 with a deposit of at least $10. So for $10, you can get at least $35 to play around with, and it's really cool. So use that code COVER1.
You are rolling in the money now. Look at you.
Yeah, $40, dude.
Again, I lost $40 this weekend. It was stolen from me. I won't get into it. But don't go to Frizzies on Allen. Again, that's promo code COVER1 on Underdog Fantasy. Okay, we're going to open up with everyone's favorite segment. I forgot to introduce it properly these last 2 weeks, but I'm not going to forget today. It's the Roundup. Again, everyone's favorite segment where we look at the latest Bills news leading into Monday night. And there is a surprising amount of news this week. And there wasn't a surprising amount of news up until about a couple hours ago when the Bills made a few moves. So we're going to start with a quick injury update. At least update the injuries, to what we know at this point. Harrison Phillips went down with an injury against the Bears, the defensive tackle who has been having a great preseason thus far, if you ask me. He re-injured the leg that he tore his ACL. He re-injured the knee, the same leg that he tore his ACL in 2019. Obviously fought back last year. Was kind of dealing with, the long-lasting effects of that ACL tear last year. Was looking better toward the end of the year, and this year, unfortunately, re-injures it. But I think Ian Rappaport came out and said that it's not as serious as initially feared, so that is reassuring. He'll probably miss some time, as Rappaport said, but McDermott made it sound very grim in his press conference yesterday. But it looks like Phillips will be back sooner, maybe not sooner rather than later, but at some point. Marquez Stevenson had that electric punt return for a touchdown and then got injured on the next play. Maybe the same play, but I think it was the next play. He had x-rays on his ankle or on his foot, came back negative, thankfully, but he was still in a walking boot, and I don't think he was seen at practice yesterday. So what's going on with him remains to be seen. Spencer Brown and Tommy Doyle also got hurt, but Sean McDermott said that they're on the earlier side, or an earlier time frame in terms of their return. So, Rob, any takeaways from these injury updates?
It's going to make the cut down to 53 very interesting. As soon as Marquez Stevenson went out, I said, you never like to see an injury, but this might be the ideal situation for the Bills. In the sense that they could put Stevenson on IR right now and keep Jay Kumaro and not lose Stevenson to waivers and have another team claim him. As far as Harrison Phillips, that's another interesting one as well. Like you said, he was probably the Bills' best defensive tackle throughout the two preseason games. And it's the same knee that he tore his ACL on a few years back, which is concerning. Sean McDermott didn't sound too optimistic about it. But then again, he sounded the same way about Deion Dawkins last week, saying he was nowhere near ready to play for them. And then he came out and played a handful of snaps against Chicago. So that remains to be seen. But then it opens the door for guys like Justin Zimmer, who we'll talk about later. But you never like to see injuries, but they could kind of help the team in a roundabout way.
Well said. That wraps up the injury section. Now, as I said, stacked roundup. The Bills made a few roster moves today, one of which was devastating, Rob. I'm still dealing with the emotional that emotional reaction. I had that visceral emotional reaction. Duke Williams is gone, presumably. As I wrote here, justice for Duke. It's terribly upsetting. I wanted to open the show with a moment of silence for Duke Williams. You and Eric shot it down, which I thought was very disrespectful, but what are you going to do? So Duke Williams was again released he was waived with the injured designation. Now, what does that mean? I didn't know. So I looked to Sal Capaccio on Twitter. And he said that, so Duke Williams, now every other team will have the opportunity to claim him. But if he doesn't get claimed, which, let's be honest, that's probably what's going to happen, he'll revert to the Bills, and then the Bills can then either release him with an injury settlement or can put him on IR for the year. I think it's more likely to be the former. I think Duke Williams will probably just be gone with an injury settlement. Duke Williams is a guy who had a lot of hype surrounding him a couple years ago. Flashed in the preseason, was that big physical receiver that the Bills didn't have. But to me, I never really bought into the hype. I was never really a big Duke Williams guy. Again, he offered something different, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he offered something good. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it looks like he's gone. They also placed Forrest Lamp on the IR. Again, Forrest Lamp, a guard who was expected to come in and make some noise this preseason, really didn't. And this was to make room for running back Kareth White and cornerback Tim Harris. Now, again, huge signings, these guys, big names. Kareth White ran a 4.37 40, okay, at his pro day. And he was also the college teammate of Devin Singletary. So there's some familiarity there in the Bills' backfield. He has 24 career carries for 122 yards, and that's in 6 games with Pittsburgh in 2019. And now Tim Harris has never taken a defensive snap in the NFL, has 18 special team snaps. That was for San Francisco last year. And both guys, from what I saw, had pretty good relative athletic scores, which means relatively they're good athletes. But okay, this is not what everyone thinks it is, Rob. I'm telling you, this isn't that they're not really planning on playing the starters next week or they haven't done that anyway. But like, this isn't that they just want extra bodies to round out camp and to round out the preseason. This is legitimate competition. So, Rob, in terms of Kareth White, is Matt Breida on the hot seat here?
No, definitely not. I mean, he has speed and things like that, but I don't think he's a guy that's going to really come in and compete for anything, maybe a practice squad role. But it is interesting that they decided to bring in another running back at this stage in the preseason. Maybe that means they want to rest Singletary and Moss for this third game, and they just need a guy to take some snaps. But I do think cornerback is a position that they want to round out with depth. But again, these aren't guys that are competing for the 53. They're probably competing for a practice squad spot.
Right, if anything.
Yeah.
I said it wasn't, but it's obviously it's more so they just need guys who can suit up on Saturday and take reps and get them out of the preseason without their actual players getting hurt. But if one of them pops off, maybe they make the roster. Maybe, potentially.
At some point during the season, possibly. But I think the 53 they got enough. They've got probably 9 or 10 guys on the bubble right now that legitimately should have a case to make the team. And I don't think these guys belong in that conversation right now.
Yeah. The Bills have about 65 guys who should be on their 53-man roster.
Yeah.
Kareth White and Tim Harris currently are not 2 of those guys, unfortunately. So we're now moving on. We're done with the Roundup, everyone's favorite segment, and we're moving on to the players who have impressed us thus far through the first 2 games of the preseason. This is probably where we're going to spend the majority of our time this podcast looking at the players who have impressed us. It was difficult to get it down to 4 because, frankly, the team as a whole has been very impressive. Very few players haven't really flashed. I mean, there have been plenty who haven't really lived up to the hype that we've created for them, but there have also been a lot who have lived up to that hype and also exceeded the hype. So, Rob, first, I'm going to let you go. who is your first player who has stood out this preseason?
I have to start with AJ Epinesa. You know, all eyes are on Greg Rousseau, but Epinesa is a guy that I think a lot of fans misinterpreted what his role would be going into this season, given the selections of Rousseau and Boogie Basham in the first and second rounds. I think they saw an underwhelming season from him last year, but he really put the work in to get to this level. You know, he dropped about 30 pounds or 25 to 30 pounds. He didn't have the strength last year. He talked about that after the Chicago game, saying that he didn't have as much oomph behind his pass rush. At Iowa, he was a power rusher that used his hands, but he couldn't really threaten the outside shoulder of tackles and really win with speed or burst. He was more of an inside rusher that won with overpowering those guys. And now we're seeing a completely different version of AJ Epinesa. He's using power. We saw him manhandle Elijah Wilkinson on that hit on Andy Dalton, but that wasn't it. That wasn't the only play that he stood out. And he was used in a variety of different alignments. Eric and Anthony had a film room session just about 2 hours ago, breaking the game down. And you look at Epinesa, he was used as a stand-up rusher next to Rousseau, rushing the B gap. And I think Epinesa is in for a huge year, and his limited action in the preseason has been stellar, especially against the pass. He had 5 pressures in 2 games and 19 pass rush snaps, which is very efficient. Most of those came on Saturday against the Bears, but against the Lions, he had that other big hit on Tim Doyle when he and Rousseau met. Both won their matchups and just really met at the quarterback to sandwich him. But Epinesa has really impressed me. And then you hear what he talked about after the game, just really having a plan with his pass rush. You know, he said he watched a lot of film and saw that he would be able to get a guy back on his heels. He used that long arm, got inside his pads, and drove him to the ground. And I think that you're going to see the technical aspect of his game this year just only benefited by his newfound athleticism. So I'm really excited about AJ Epinesa.
The craziest thing about AJ Epinesa's preseason to me is that I think we could both agree. I think everyone who watched the Bills thus far could agree that he has consistently been one of the Bills' most impactful defenders.
Mm-hmm.
He has not shown up on the stat sheet. Which is why watching the stat sheet is stupid, and which is why, I mean, you're going to come across people who are like, oh, you're hyping up AJ Epinesa, he has no stats. And it's like, well, watch the games. Like, as you brought up his pressures, he's just a different player than what he was in college and what he was a year ago. Now, I will also say, I think you said that he was underwhelming last year. I think he largely was underwhelming, but he also had a few flashes. Mm-hmm. I think I made a tweet last year. It was something along the lines of like, AJ Epinesa is the most consistently impactful, irrelevant Bill. Like he was not really flashy, not all that consistent, but every once in a while he'd show something. And this preseason, he's showing something quite often, really piecing it together. As you said, not really used all that often in the preseason, kind of in a limited role, which starters are, but AJ Epinesa really making the most of his opportunities. I really like what I've seen from AJ Epinesa and also Greg Rousseau, who I'll get to in a second here. But I'm going to preview my hot take. I maybe shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it. Rob, is there a chance AJ Epinesa supplants Mario Addison on the depth chart?
You know, I think there is. Mario Addison said he didn't want to play a big amount of snaps this season. And I think that the Bills want him to be a situational pass rusher because that's what he is. And he knows that at this stage in his career, he doesn't want to play 600 or 700 snaps. He wants to be on those third and long situations. But now it's interesting because we've seen so much production from a pressure standpoint from Buffalo's defensive line that really you can make a case for wanting 5 or 6 of those guys out there on third and long. So those snaps are going to be hard to come by, but that's a good problem for Leslie Frazier to have. But like you said, with Epinesa not even making the stat sheet and having that type of impact, it's impressive. And I think you're going to see the rest of the guys on the defensive line benefit from the pressures like that don't really show up in the box score because Epinesa is flushing quarterbacks into other defenders. And I think we're going to see a lot more sacks as a result of big plays from other guys on the team this season.
Message here from Nick G. He writes, Epinesa is a completely different player this year. He's faster, stronger, and sharper. Absolutely. He is a different player. As we said last week, or maybe it might have been last week, I don't know. But he has a different play style. He's a speed rusher now. He was drafted as the power guy who can kick inside. Doesn't have the frame to do that this year, but you don't want him to do it. You don't want him to do that this year because he's just fast, has the burst, has the hand usage. Very, very good preseason from AJ Epinesa. Again, I just hope he can carry it into the regular season. We said that AJ Epinesa hasn't appeared on the stat sheet. I'm going to highlight a guy who has gotten on the stat sheet in a big way. It's the other young defensive end. It's Greg Rousseau, who has been electric throughout these first 2 preseason games, the first 2 games of his professional career. I was doing some research earlier. This was crazy to me. Greg Rousseau against the Bears, this is according to PFF, everyone's favorite, had 9 snaps against the Bears, 7 of which were pass rush snaps. And he had 3 pressures on those 7 pass rush snaps. So that's like on nearly half of the plays in which he could pressure the quarterback, he did. And we're saying this about a guy, and we were like, I don't know if he's going to create pressure. I don't know if he consistently creates pressure. In college, they were kind of cleanup sacks. I don't know if he can create pressure on his own. He's doing it, not on his own necessarily, but he's doing it using his strength, his power, his athleticism, just physically dominating guys. Again, as you said, Anthony and Eric did a film room an hour or 2 ago, looked at the defensive line and Greg Rousseau. Greg Rousseau is just physically dominating guys. Again, his sack this week, I think it was arguably more impressive than his sack last week. He just started to the outside on Lashavius Simmons. Lashavius? I don't know. I don't cover the Bears, so I don't know how to pronounce Lashavius. Sorry if you're watching. But yeah, started to the outside, just kind of pushed him, then cut inside and got a free hit on Dalton. It was just a great use of power, great use of length, great use of athleticism. Greg Rousseau has been something else. And this is, again, according to PFF, he's 5th among rookie defensive ends in total pressures this preseason with 6. He's 1st in pressure rate with 33%. That's not sustainable, I don't think. But they don't need it to be sustainable in the regular season. Because, again, they're going to have Hughes. They're going to have Addison. They're going to have Epinesa. Rousseau is going to be the 4th choice defensive end probably. So if you can have him in a rotational role, still coming in and just being physically dominant, again, if he works himself into a bigger role, great. But they don't need him to be in that bigger role, which is a really nice spot for the Bills to be in, where they don't need these first-round picks to come in and be world beaters straight away. You can have Greg Rousseau come in and be a 4th choice defensive end who just gets pressure where he can, and you can be okay with that, which is why, again, that's why I'm so pleased with what I've seen from Greg Rousseau, because he has been physically dominant for the most part, and we are seeing that he can be productive this year in a year where we didn't think that was going to happen. He can just win with athleticism, win with power, and it's good to see. So, Rob, Greg Rousseau.
Rousseau's been nothing short of fun to watch so far, man. And like you talk about the production, those numbers are crazy. But what's even more impressive to me is how he's played against the run. And he doesn't have the blow up tackles for loss against the run, but him setting the edge consistently against Chicago was really impressive to me. He's using his length and holding his own against those tackles and tight ends and spilling runs back inside for those big defensive tackles and linebackers to clean up. So that's just as impressive as his pass rushing to me, if not more, because Rousseau was a guy who was really kind of looked clumsy to me almost at Miami and didn't really know what he was doing, and he was just winning with his athleticism. So to see like his technique now and how he's utilizing his length and learning how to really play within his body and use his traits to his advantage, just 2 preseason games into his career, it's been fun to watch, and I'm excited to see what this duo of Rousseau and Epinesa can do this season.
I mean, according to my hot take, we might not see it. It might be Hughes and Epinesa wreaking havoc. But again, too busy teasing that. Yes, Greg Rousseau, as you said, has been very fun to watch, and I'm excited to watch him play in the regular season. I don't know if he's playing next week. I'd like to see him play, but if I were, no one cares what I would do if I was the head coach, but I wouldn't play the starters this week. Josh Allen doesn't need to play. Neither do any of the other starters. But they might, because it's a home game. They might want to give a little preview. I don't know. We'll get in. We're not going to get into it. So, Rob, who is your next standout player from the start of the preseason here?
Isaiah McKenzie has to take that for me. Entering training camp, he was a guy a lot of people didn't even know if he would make the team. Talking about Marquez Stevenson, Brandon Powell, even Matt Breida might be taking his return job. But all he's done is impress. And he had that muff, but then he comes back and has, like, I think 3 receptions on the next drive, has a big punt return. And he really took over the game in that first half. He caught 7 passes for 72 yards, and he's just been really impactful throughout training camp in the preseason. And I think that he came back as a different player, not a different player, but a more improved and hungry player by all accounts this season. Heath Farwell loves him. The players love him. He's one of those guys in the locker room that everyone seems to gravitate towards, even if they're a little annoyed with him. They seem, just from all of his talking, but he can talk as much as he wants right now because he's doing everything they're asking of him, and he's silenced all the critics so far. So I'm excited to see him this season. Obviously, it remains to be seen whether Stevenson makes the 53 or if they finagle a way around that. But McKenzie is definitely locked in as the backup slot. He's going to be used in that gadget role again on the trick plays. And then in the return game is what I'm really excited to see because he's explosive.
Griff comments, of course he's hungry. Poor guy is living off candy. Yeah. Very funny.
Love that.
But I've been big on Isaiah McKenzie just because I like what Isaiah McKenzie stands for. He's kind of the microcosm of just how good this regime has been. From a waiver claim, not even a waiver claim, well, technically, from the Bills trying to sign him off the Broncos practice squad in 2018, to then claiming him off waivers, to then getting him involved in the offense and having him as a special teamer, to where he is now, like an actual formidable offensive piece. Like you said, looked very good this week in the slot, and as a wide receiver, is now refined as a route runner, or more refined than he was at least. Looks like he can play wide receiver for an NFL team, probably some considerable snaps for an NFL team as a wide receiver. Will that be for the Bills? Probably not. They have Cole Beasley, and they're pretty stacked at wide receiver. But to have a player like Isaiah McKenzie, where if he went elsewhere, could be a starting slot receiver, probably, to have him as your 6th receiver, I mean, that's pretty good. But that's just, again, it's a microcosm of just how successful this regime has been, from developing this random dude on Denver's practice squad into your starting returner and then, a formidable receiver. It's been great to see. So I was not one of the people who had Isaiah McKenzie on the roster bubble entering camp, regardless of what I've said on past podcasts. I think I said on the first podcast, I was like, if McKenzie and Stevenson are equal, I think they'd go with Stevenson just because he is the term. But they haven't been equal. Isaiah McKenzie, really showed that he had that offensive touch early in camp, really showed that he can be a piece offensively. And Marquez Stevenson really didn't show much of anything until the first preseason game. Now, I do think Isaiah McKenzie is in a place now where, like, he kind of is fortunate that he had that strong start to the preseason or to the training camp. And he's also played well in the preseason, especially in week 2 offensively, because Marquez Stevenson had that electric punt return in the same week where Isaiah McKenzie muffed a punt. So if Isaiah McKenzie wasn't playing that well offensively, if Isaiah McKenzie really wasn't living up to the hype and really wasn't showing anything that he can be used offensively, we'd be having a much different conversation. We'd be saying Marquez Stevenson might supplant him for that roster spot. But now we're saying, well, despite Marquez Stevenson's strong play on special teams, Isaiah McKenzie's going to make the roster. And if Marquez Stevenson does make it, it won't be at the expense of McKenzie. So again, McKenzie, very good player, very good preseason. And I'm pleased with what he's done. I'm going to stick on the offensive side of the ball if you're ready to move on to the next guy here.
I am. Let's hear it.
Okay. Devin Singletary, again, has been very strong. He didn't have as many opportunities in week 2. He had 2 carries for 21 yards and a touchdown, but the touchdown was probably his most impressive play of the preseason thus far. Again, the film room with Eric and Anthony. If you haven't watched it, go watch it after this, please. But again, Devin Singletary kind of gets the ball and then does like a dead leg to make a guy kind of open up a little bit, maybe. I don't know if that's how you would describe it, but kind of move move more to the sideline. And then Devin Singletary cuts back inside. He doesn't necessarily, it's not a case where it was like with AJ Epinesa where he's a different player. Like it's not that he has a different skill set. It's that he's added to his skill set, right? We've always talked about the Devin Singletary vision, but now he has the burst to pair with that vision. He could always see the holes, but now he has the burst to attack those holes. And with Devin Singletary, I think his emergence and him adding that burst to his game, it now gives the Bills a more well-rounded backfield, at least more well-rounded than they had at the start of training camp. Because with Zach Moss, it was like the head down guy, power guy. Matt Breida was the speed guy. Devin Singletary was what? Like there?
Yeah, he was very meh, I would say, last year. And like you said, he has that burst to attack the holes now, and he has some more power to him too. And I'm not talking about like plotting, get you 2 or 3 yards power, but in 2019 we saw him force all those missed tackles, and that was mostly with his elusiveness. And now he's running through arm tackles and breaking tackles, and that's what you want to see. And he's never going to be that guy that gets those 70, 80 yard touchdown runs, but he'll get you 20, 25 yard runs now, I think, off of carries that probably would have got him 3 or 4 last year, just because of that burst and that added breakaway speed.
Yeah, it adds a nice element to the backfield because they didn't have that burst guy. They didn't have the quick guy. They had the fast guy with Breida. Now they have the quick guy with Singletary, and they have the head down guy with Moss. This is potentially, if they had a bad quarterback, I'd say they have a 3-headed monster. But they have a very good quarterback. So I don't know how often we're going to see Moss, Singletary, and Breida get considerable snaps in any given game. But having the potential, or having the backfield has that potential, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Like if Allen, God forbid, ever is having an off week or a down week, or again, God forbid he gets hurt, they have, I believe, the backfield where if they need to rely on the ground game, they can, because they have guys who can do a little bit of everything. You get a very well-rounded backfield in what they have. So anything else to add on the backfield in general, or Devin Singletary?
No, I think that covers it.
Egriff writes, Bills have a 4-headed monster. That was that's what he meant. Motor Moss, Breida, Josh. Yes, Josh Allen, maybe a better power back than Zach Moss. I don't know. People are talking.
He's still their goal line back until proven otherwise. So
until Reggie Gilliam, Rob, it's like he didn't watch the preseason game. Yeesh.
I know.
That's not your hot take or anything later. So before we move on to the next section, any other players that have stood out to you that you don't really want to go in depth about, but just you want to give them props because they deserve it?
I have to say Cody Ford. We talked about him last week a lot. He didn't really have the type of impact he did in the first week, but I still have been impressed with him, especially because of how low I was on him. So I'll say Cody Ford on offense, and then on defense, I'll have to go with Andre Smith. Andre Smith has really showed up.
I thought you were gonna go Tyrell Dodson.
He has too, but Smith has definitely done a little better. And I'm calling him Smith and not Davis this week, so
I'm sure
he's done enough to get his real last name mentioned on the Cover One Roundup podcast.
That hit was crazy on Justin Fields.
It was.
And then his reaction afterwards to go on Twitter and just clown people. That's the reaction you want to see.
Yeah, for sure.
Hilarious. All right, so moving on now to players who will need a strong finish to the preseason in order to crack the 53-man roster, or in some cases, practice squad, in order to stick around at One Bills Drive for a couple more weeks. So, Rob, I'll let you start here again. Who to you needs a strong week 3 in order to climb onto that 53-man roster?
It's got to be Justin Zimmer, and I've been talking about Justin Zimmer all summer. The guy is just exactly what this this team is all about in terms of character and work ethic. And he's got the measurables that Brandon Beane likes. He's a freak athlete, and he seems like he's starting to put it all together. It was going to come down to him or Harrison Phillips or Vernon Butler, potentially, if they decide to move on from that contract. But Zimmer has played extremely well. And it's going to be tough for him to crack this roster. But I think that if he can put together another strong game against Green Bay, it's going to be very tough to get rid of him. And that's a player that Leslie Frazier said as well. He's going to be very tough to get rid of just because of what he does off the field in terms of preparation, what he's done on the field. He was insane against the Bears in terms of chasing down ball carriers to the sidelines, beating linebackers there. And then what he's doing, causing pressure. I think he had 2 or 3 pressures against the Bears, but he got an extended look too. So I think the Bills really want to see him put it together. Against the Lions, I think he played 9 snaps. Against Chicago, he played 42. And in a preseason game, that is telling. So the Bills are letting him get that film, and they're going to go back and watch it and see if this is a guy worth keeping around, because you saw him slowly improve last season. And I don't know if he's a guy that they'll be able to sneak onto the practice squad. I mean, they might be able to, but in a perfect world, he's on that 53. And then Harrison Phillips' injury might be the catalyst that gets him on there.
Yeah, like you say, you don't know, you don't know if they're going to be able to sneak him out of the practice squad. Like, there are a lot of bad teams in the NFL. Like, Justin Zimmer is an NFL player, I think. I don't think they will be able to sneak him out of the practice squad. But even saying that, I think he's done enough to make this 53-man roster, regardless of if he plays in week 3. That, again, just my opinion. But the film room, I keep referencing it because it was really good. But like, he chased down a screen. Like, how many how many defensive tackles you see it chasing down a screen? And he almost
caught Justin Fields from behind too. He took a great angle to the sideline to catch him when he was scrambling. So he's a freak athlete. And you want to talk about the relative athletic scores of those offensive linemen that they drafted this year. Take a look at Zimmer's from when he was coming out of Ferris State, because at the time when Spark was the big thing, the Nike metric, Zimmer was the most athletic player ever on that. So he's a fun guy to watch. And now seeing him really put it all together and using those tools with his technique and everything that he's doing, he's a fun player to watch. And it would be tough to watch him go to another team and really thrive.
I don't think he's going to. I think he's going to stick around. He's shown enough last season and also in the preseason this year, especially in the preseason this year. I think he's sticking around. There's an interesting conversation going on in the chat here between Justin Zimmer and Vernon Butler. They're not in the chat. They're not having the conversation. It's a conversation about them. Is this a thing that could happen? Could they keep Vernon Butler over Justin Zimmer? I don't want that to happen.
It's tough just because of Butler's contract. And I think they would have to eat something like $4 million if they released him. So I think that's the only thing that would play a role in keeping Butler over Zimmer. Matt Perino had his 53 projection today, and he kept Butler over Zimmer, talking about Butler's versatility over Zimmer's, saying that Zimmer was undersized and might not be able to play the different alignments that Butler can. And I could see that on the surface. But if you're taking away the contract and all things are equal, I don't see that any way that you can keep Butler over Zimmer.
Right, you go with the better player.
Right.
Like, regardless. But I thought Greg Thompson said that they actually could save money by cutting Butler. I could be wrong. I could have misheard. But even so, like, I would keep Justin Zimmer over Vernon Butler, probably regardless of the contract situation. Even if they have to, $4 million is a lot to eat for that, you know.
I'm looking right now. It's $4 million in dead money, and they'd save 1.3, so they'd have about $2.7 million in dead money.
Okay, so they do.
It's not as bad, yeah.
Right, that's more. You can stomach more. Like, is $4 million enough to eat? Or is the difference between Zimmer and Butler like that big that I'm going to eat $4 million? I don't know, but I'd eat $2 million.
Yeah, it's definitely something, because they don't have a lot of cap room, and they're going to want to roll some over. So there's going to be finances have to play a role, but I I don't know, man. The way Zimmer has looked, I don't know if you want to get rid of him for a guy that's going to save you, cost you $2 million. I don't know.
Hey man, it's that familiarity. That's what it is. He was in Carolina, and thus
Yeah.
will be in Buffalo.
Yep.
That's just what's gonna happen. My players, I have players. See, this section is who needs a strong preseason week 3, and for me, I just went with position groups for both. So I kind of misread my own topic, but for me, who needs a strong preseason week 3? It's the bottom of the quarterback depth chart. It's Davis Webb and Jake Fromm, neither of whom to me have looked particularly impressive. Davis Webb looked fine in week 1. As we said last week, fine in terms of like playing against the Detroit Lions in the second half of a preseason game. Like he looked fine in that sense, but like nothing more. And Jake Fromm, he's made a few nice throws. Would it be fair to say that Jake Fromm has had higher highs than Davis Webb?
I think you can say that. I think
it's not saying much, but
right. Fourth quarter comebacks, quarterback wins are a stat. So
very true. And again, Fromm, nice throw to Marquez Stevenson in week 1. But again, he didn't look particularly well in week 2 against the Bears. Davis Webb, after showing some athleticism in week 1, I think that athleticism kind of did more harm than good in week 2. Almost threw an interception that was returned for a pick 6. The almost interception was very eerie to the Nick McLeod play, eerily similar to the Nick McLeod play that we weren't sure if it actually happened or not last week, but it did. A nearly exact same situation happened last week to Davis Webb. Obviously was called back, but Davis Webb did lose 2 fumbles. Looked like he broke his shoulder at one point. Didn't happen. Thankfully, he came back in the game, but still fumbled twice, and those 2 fumbles were given up. So neither to me have shown that like they're third and fourth string quarterbacks. I don't know what I was expecting out of them, but neither have looked particularly great. And I don't think either have shown that they need to be rostered, that they need to be on the 53-man. Both were a long shot going into the preseason. One of them would have needed a strong preseason to make the Bills carry a third quarterback on the active roster. Neither of them have. So both of them this week are competing for either a spot on the practice squad or a spot on another roster to see if they can get traded, or if they do get cut, if they can latch onto another active roster. To me, I don't know if Davis Webb has any trade value because he's older than Jake Fromm, and Davis Webb has already gotten cut twice when he was younger, and neither team traded him. So I don't think 26-year-old Davis Webb has any trade value if 24-year-old Davis Webb didn't have any trade value, if that makes sense. Jake Fromm might have some trade value. I don't know. He may have shown enough in college and then in week 1 of the preseason in particular to get a team to swing like a 7th round pick for him, but I don't even know that. So this week, what they are competing for, and again, I think both of them are going to get considerable time this week. They're competing to be that guy on the practice squad because I don't think they're keeping 2 quarterbacks on the practice squad. I just don't see a need for it. It's 16-man practice squad, but why would 2 of them be quarterbacks? Doesn't make sense to me. So they're competing for a spot on the practice squad, or again, trying to get some good film out there to make it onto another roster. So, Rob, if I had to ask you right now, which one of these quarterbacks is on the practice squad come week 1?
Probably be Webb, just for what he does in terms of preparation with Josh Allen. But then again, Fromm is a draft pick. I don't know how invested they are really in Fromm. I think they would have at least let him come around the team last year and not done the whole COVID thing if they really thought that they would need a third quarterback. But it's tough to say. You know, Webb, with all his coaching aspirations and all that, that's a cool story. But when it comes to football, and like, I don't think you're going to roster a guy for that. But then again, it might be somebody that's valuable for the preparation. But then again, Josh Allen has Brian Dable, Ken Dorsey, Shea Tierney. He doesn't need a practice squad player to really coach him up any more than what he's getting already and where he is in his career. So Fromm might have a little more upside just because of his age and where he's at in his career as opposed to Webb. But I don't think either make the 53-man roster. I don't think they need to keep 3 quarterbacks. I think Trubisky showed that he can operate the offense more than effectively. And like you said, it's going to be probably one of those guys on the practice squad. And if I had to gun to my head, I would say it's Fromm.
I just had to put this comment up because it's clever. Bigfoot anthropologist. Trade Jake to Atlanta. He's from Georgia. Very good.
Yeah, I love that.
Very good. Does Jake Fromm make it to the practice squad?
These things are so interesting because there's teams that always will take a chance on quarterbacks and roll the dice, but Fromm isn't that guy. I don't think you're going to claim him on waivers and take his contract. I think you're going to want to get him off as a free agent, if anything.
That's a good point. So you don't think either have Davis Webb doesn't have trade value. Does Jake Fromm have trade value? Or do you think, like, even if he balls out, teams are just going to be like, well, let's just see if they cut him?
I think it's going to be a wait and see type thing. I don't think a team's going to give up a draft pick for a guy like Fromm.
I would tend to agree. Jake Fromm, I'm sorry. I have been nothing but rude to Jake Fromm on this podcast.
A month in, and you're still burying the guy.
That is one player who will never come on this podcast, as though there were, 52 others. But so, Rob, who to you is someone else who needs a strong week 3 in order to stick?
So I want to see more out of the bottom linebackers, and maybe more isn't the right word because we've seen a lot from all of them, especially Andre Smith. I think Tyrell Dodson has played way better than a lot of people are giving him credit for just because of the impact plays that Smith has had. But I think Dodson's looked really good. Tyrell Adams was a guy I was excited to see when they signed him. He was extremely productive in Houston, but he hasn't really done much. He's not it for me right now. So I think it's going to be between Smith and Dodson for that final linebacker spot. And it's crazy because you have these guys on the bubble that really could contribute for another team right away. And now you're talking about a guy that's probably going to make the team and only contribute on special teams unless there's an injury or they really need a guy late in the game to come off the bench. But I do want to see Tyrell Dodson kind of put it all together or leave it all out there on Saturday and see if he can make that the Bills keep 6 linebackers instead of just 5. So it'll be interesting to see.
So to you, Andre Smith is a lock, probably already.
Probably.
I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
T-Dot, I think he's a guy who could sneak on the practice squad.
Yeah, I agree.
Do I want him on the 53? Yeah, I like Tyrell Dodson. I think he's shown a fair bit in his limited opportunities that he's gotten, but I don't know if he's shown enough that there's like another GM out there just like watching him, hovering over his name, being like, if he gets cut loose, we're going for him.
Right. No, I agree. I definitely think he's one of those practice squad guys that'll go up and down from the roster to the practice squad on every few weeks, because you see that every year with the Bills, and there's guys that are on the practice squad that are going to play in the regular season, and I think Dodson's a guy like that.
Again, this isn't saying that he doesn't deserve to be on the 53 roster. I think he's shown a fair bit, but I just don't know if he would not sneak through. But he did almost sign with the Raiders, so maybe Mike Mayock somewhere out there, just keeping Tyrell Dodson's phone number on speed dial. Just like, if you get cut, I can't do a Mike Mayock impression. Would be. I'm
not even going to try.
It's just Pennsylvanian. Pennsylvanians have quite the accent, but yeah, no. And I agree. Tyrell Adams, at least to me, really hasn't shown all that much. People love to point at his tackle numbers from last year, and it's like, you know who else was a tackling machine? Preston Brown. And they replaced him. That's
right. You're on the Houston Texans defense, and everyone's getting to the second level there. So
exactly.
Tackles are not the number to go by. And then they also said the other thing they'll point to is special teams. Everyone on this team plays special teams and fairly decently. So having a good 7th linebacker that can play special teams isn't the same type of credit as it was in 2017. And these decisions are tough, but Tyrell Adams, I don't think has a shot.
No, I think he unfortunately will be on the outside looking in come roster cutdown day. Again, it's not that he's played poorly. It's just that Andre Smith has really taken advantage of these opportunities that he's gotten. And Tyrell Dodson, again, signed as a UDFA. They've developed him for 2 years at this point. I think he would stick around on the 53 before Tyrell Adams would. And we just had a conversation about Tyrell Dodson not making the 53. So that gives you some insight into what we think about Tyrell Adams' 53-man roster chances. So I'm going to move to the secondary, to the depth cornerback position. That's not a position. The depth cornerback situation. That's what I want to focus on here in players who I'd like to see step up. Now, we kind of went hard on the depth cornerbacks last week. We were saying that they really don't have a guy, a fourth boundary guy. But then we kind of came to the conclusion that no team really has a good fourth boundary guy. It's just not something that really exists. So Rashad Wildgoose, I just had a brain fart. Rashad Wildgoose didn't look great in his preseason debut, but neither did any of the other cornerbacks. I think Rashad Wildgoose dropped out or bounced back the best, had 2 nice pass deflections, one on the boundary, one was a breakup over the middle of the field, I believe. Rashad Wildgoose bounced back well. Nick McLeod had a pick. Elijah Griffin, I really haven't seen all that much from, much of anything from. And then who did they sign today? What was his name? Tim Harris, dark horse to make the roster, certainly, with a strong week 3. But this situation, it's more so like one of them needs to have a huge week 3 to not only show that they're worthy of the roster, but to show the Bills that they should keep 5 corners. Or would it be 6 corners?
It would be 6.
To show the Bills that they should keep 6 corners at the expense of an extra defensive lineman, because we've had all these conversations like, are they keeping 11 defensive linemen? If they keep 6 corners, they're not keeping 6 defensive linemen. That's just, the numbers don't add up like that, unfortunately. So, yeah, it's going to have to be a big week from one of these guys in order to show the Bills that they need 6 corners to have a fourth boundary guy. If I had to bet on it, I would say it'd be Wildgoose, just because he's a guy who they drafted, a guy who has shown at least some promise here in week 2 of the preseason with those 2 nice pass deflections. But I don't even know what Wildgoose would have to do in order to make his way onto the roster, because I don't know. I don't think he would get snatched up. I don't think a team would sign him to their active roster.
See, I don't know. Rookie draft picks are always difficult because you'd think that another team would pick them up, in the sense that, especially a 6-rounder. So obviously the Bills felt that there was other teams that were out there and they didn't think they would be able to sign him as an undrafted free agent. So there is likely going to be a market for him. But that's just the risk that they're going to have to take with a lot of players this year. But I also want to see more. If you're talking about depth corner, I want to see more from Dane Jackson. This is somebody that entered camp as somebody that was supposed to be a breakout guy and possibly start. And since camp started, all that we've seen from him is his stock just slowly trickling downwards. And I don't think that he's played – I don't think he's been bad, but I don't think he's done anything coverage-wise to say, oh, yeah, this guy is worthy of starting should Levi Wallace suffer an injury. So you're talking about depth corners that are actually going to be on the team. I think Dane Jackson needs to show up. Wildgoose impressed me. I'm sorry, I can't say Wildgoose without laughing a little bit on the inside, but Wildgoose is somebody that looked good last week, and Cam Lewis, too, is someone else that's going to be fighting. But like you said, it's going to be tough because there's no 4th boundary corner. But I do want to see the bottom of the roster guys step up, because this is another position where they're going to be on the practice squad and probably have to get called up throughout the season. So someone's going to have to make a strong case for themselves.
Cam Lewis may be the only practice squad lock as of right now, because or there's obviously other guys who are practice squad locks, but I see no scenario where Cam Lewis is on the 53-man roster, and I also see no scenario where he's not on the practice squad. They're going to roster Taron Johnson, obviously, and Saran Neal's not going anywhere because of his special teams ability, and I guess he's going to be the de facto backup nickel. Is that the word, de facto?
Yeah.
Wow. Look at me. Journalism school got me somewhere. But with Cam Lewis, he'll be like the third nickel, but on the practice squad. He'll get playing time for sure. He'll be again a yo-yo guy, but he'll make the practice squad. So I'm not really all that interested. Like I'll watch him if he makes a play. Maybe I'll correct myself next week, but I think he's a practice squad lock for sure. Yeah, it's Rashad Wild Goose, man. One could say that he's chasing a roster spot. Wild Goose chase for a roster spot.
There you go.
There's the headline. Change the podcast title. But it's almost to the point where like it doesn't matter what he does because I don't know if McLeod's jumping him. It might just be Wild Goose is really the only guy at this point who I could see sneaking onto the roster. And again, as you said, him being a draft pick, they might think there is a market for him, so they kind of have to keep him on the roster just so no one else steals him. It's going to be, hey, with a strong week 3, he makes their decision for him.
Definitely.
Okay, moving on. Egriff writes, Cam took Terran's job last year. I like him as a backup to Terran. Yeah, that's a good point. He did start a game at nickel. But like, I think they like Terran, and I just don't think, I don't know. They're not keeping 3 nickels on the roster, are they? I know they play a lot of nickel.
They played Dane Jackson in the slot a little bit against the Bears.
Well, there you have it.
There's that.
Technically keeping 3 nickels. Playing 3 guys, or that Micah Hyde played nickel in Green Bay. So there's 4 nickels on the roster.
Yeah, they have guys that could play. They don't need a 6th guy that just so they can say they have another nickel. So these guys play inside and out, but I don't know. It's going to be a wild time on Bill's Twitter when these cut downs happen. Wild goose time on Bill's Twitter when they cut down to 53.
You got any hot takes for us this week, Rob? What is your biggest I just set you up for it. I'm sorry, but I'm going to cut you off because your take is hotter than mine because it involves the departure of one of my favorite all-time NFL players. So that's going to be a tough one to hear. So I'm going to be crying when you give yours, so I'll just give mine now, and I apologize for that. My hot take is that A.J. Epinesa starts for the Bills week 1 at defensive end, largely for the reasons that you said earlier. Mario Addison kind of wants to be a rotational guy this year, and, I mean, he's aging. He was kind of productive last year in a sense, but not to the point where, like, if they get someone better, that he wouldn't be supplanted on the depth chart. And A.J. Epinesa has had a strong training camp. One of the few players, at least in the time that I've been covering the Bills, who comes in as the training camp star, who comes in like as the hyped guy, and then has carried that over into the preseason and has actually looked well and has lived up to the hype. I think the last guy was Eddie Yarborough, like the last guy who people were like, oh, he's good in training camp, but then he was good in the preseason and snuck onto the roster. With Epinesa, it's different though, because he was highly touted. Comes in, changes his game, and he looks better than he's ever looked, probably. So I think between Addison wanting to take a step back and Epinesa showing that he can take that step forward, or he has taken that step forward, I just think everything is kind of falling into place here for A.J. Epinesa to start opposite Jerry Hughes week 1.
Yeah, I don't think that's that hot of a take. I mean, it seems like
not a hot take.
Yeah, you got to bring the heat next week, man.
Writes, that's not a hot take. I know it's not a hot take. I was like, I had submitted to not having a hot take this week, and then I looked at the Google Drive document and I saw that you had a hot take, and I was like, well, I need a hot take. What is it going to be? And it was the only thing I could think of was A.J. Epinesa. I had nothing else. Yeah,
I mean, he's been taking the first team reps all through camp. I think Rousseau is the guy that kind of benefited from Hughes being out. So I think Epinesa definitely starts, but we will see a lot of Mario Addison rotating in.
I think Addison is still first on the depth chart, though. I think it goes Addison, Epinesa. Am I getting off on a technicality here? I might be getting off on a technicality.
You're probably getting off on a technicality.
There we go.
I think Epinesa, I agree with you, though. I think Epinesa takes the first snap.
There, Egriff. Yeah, it's not a technicality. Or it is whatever. Epinesa's starting. Rob, what's your hot take?
My hot take is that Reggie Gilliam makes the roster and Tywan Jones does not. Tywan Jones hasn't suited up this preseason. Obviously, the Bills say he's an elite gunner. He is valuable, extremely valuable on special teams, but I think that what Reggie Gilliam brings on offense as that Swiss Army knife is also valuable. And Brian Dable, he was on the Part of My Take podcast last week and talked about what he wants to do with fullbacks in his offense. We see Dawson Knox and Jacob Hollister can line up back there a little bit in that H-back role, but I think Gilliam brings more as a lead blocker, and he could do a couple things in the passing game as like a gadget guy getting in space. And we saw his block on that Zach Moss run against the Bears, and I think that overall he's the guy that they want to keep. He'll create an extra gap in the running lane, in the running game, and he plays on special teams as well. You can move Kumaro to gunner. There's probably a couple other guys that they could put there opposite Saran Neal, but I think Reggie Gilliam makes this team at the expense of Taiwan Jones. They might bring Taiwan Jones back later. It might be one of those situations where they cut the veteran for his salary and then bring him back, but I think on the initial 53-man roster, Reggie Gilliam makes it.
Devastating. It's really devastating because I've told this story before. I don't know where. I don't think it was on this podcast, so I'll tell it here. So I like Taiwan Jones because it was kind of like a bit back at Bills Wire in 2017 that like Taiwan Jones was on the team. So always have liked Taiwan Jones. And then in 2018, when I worked for the Bills, I was interviewing him for a Bills Today section or note or whatever about him being voted a special teams captain. And no one talked to Taiwan Jones because why would reporters talk to Taiwan Jones? So I go up to him and I'm like, hey, Taiwan, can I ask you a few questions? And he's like, yeah, can I record you? And I was like, sure. So he pulls out his phone and just Instagram lives me asking him questions. Because I guess this was so infrequent of a thing that he got interviewed that he's like, I need to document this. I got to put this on the IG Live for everyone to see.
Got to be archived. I matter.
It was hilarious. Again, for 21-year-old Kyle. It was very funny. Still is funny. And I would hate to see Taiwan Jones, but he's left since then. So, hey, I've been heartbroken once. I'll be heartbroken again. But this makes sense, unfortunately. So we're at the point with this roster that it's so good that like keeping players who only play special teams, like you kind of shouldn't do that, or you don't have to do it. Like you can have a Taiwan Jones who's a very good gunner, or you can have a Jay Kumro who can play gunner and also contribute on special, or can also contribute offensively. Mm-hmm. Or like, and that's the thing with Gilliam and Jones, it's not a 1-for-1. It's not like Gilliam would replace Taiwan Jones on
right. There'd be
teams.
Moving pieces there.
Right. But Gilliam would still play special teams in some capacity. And then he would be the goal line back, the blocker. And I do think Dable could do some fun things with the fullback, especially with the fullback with the athleticism of Reggie Gilliam, with the skill set of Reggie Gilliam. I'd like to see what Dable can do with a guy like Reggie Gilliam in a not significant role, but in a role, at least a bigger role than he had last year. So I hate to say it, Rob, but I agree. I agree with your take.
Nice. I'm honored.
E-Griff writes, Taiwan Jones sounds like a kung fu exploitation.
E-Griff is bringing it this week.
E-Griff's bringing the heat this week. We appreciate it, E-Griff.
Yeah.
So, does that wrap it up?
I think it does.
Is there who are they playing this week? The Packers?
Yes, sir. Wrapping it up. The Jay Kumaro, Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, what if Aaron Rodgers steals Jay Kumaro? What if we have a kidnapping situation on the field? Then we don't have the replacement gunner.
Then Taiwan Jones is back. Changes a lot.
Well, okay. So if Jay Kumaro makes it out this weekend, makes it out of Highmark Stadium, still with the Bills, Taiwan Jones is gone, unfortunately. So I think that wraps it up. Thank you guys for watching the Cover One Roundup. Again, here live every Monday at 9 p.m. and subsequently wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to bookmark cover1.net. Subscribe to Cover One Premium if you're interested. We've got some great content cooking up over there. Always have great content written by Rob. A lot of good content over there. I was going to say by me, but that's hit or miss. But yeah, great stuff over there. Follow Cover One on Twitter at Cover One. Rob, where can the people follow you on Twitter?
You can find me at RobQuinn619.
You can follow me on Twitter at Kyle Silagyi. Again, make sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Thank you for sponsoring. Use promo code COVER1. So that wraps it up this week. We'll talk to you next week when we wrap up the Bills preseason. Maybe we'll have a 53-man roster projection. Can we do that in an hour show?
I think we can.
We'll make it work. All right. So again, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next Monday.